The world order is shifting. We are living through a period of profound transformation, where the familiar structures that have defined international relations for decades are being challenged and reimagined. The global stage is no longer dominated by a single superpower, but is instead becoming a complex arena of competing interests and emerging alliances. For decades, the United States dominated global economics and politics, with the dollar as the backbone of international trade. American influence shaped the rules of commerce, diplomacy, and security, and the world's financial systems revolved around the strength and stability of the U.S. economy. The dollar was not just a currency, but a symbol of trust and power, facilitating transactions from Wall Street to Shanghai. But the rise of new powers, especially the expanded BRICS group, now including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt and Iran, signals a move toward a multipolar world. These nations, once considered peripheral to the global order, are now asserting themselves on the world stage, demanding a greater say in how the international system is governed. BRICS is no longer just a collection of emerging markets. It's a powerful bloc representing a huge share of global population, GDP, and resources. Together, these countries account for more than 40% of the world's people, and a rapidly growing portion of its economic output. Their combined influence is reshaping the balance of power, challenging the dominance of established Western institutions. Their agenda has grown, expanding from simple economic cooperation to ambitious goals like de-dollarization, which seeks to reduce reliance on the US dollar in global trade and finance. This shift is not just about economics, it's about sovereignty, influence, and the desire to create a more balanced and equitable world order, and building alternative financial systems. BRICS nations are developing new payment mechanisms, establishing their own development banks, and forging agreements that bypass traditional Western-controlled institutions. These efforts are laying the groundwork for a parallel financial architecture that could one day rival the existing system. The US, facing this challenge, has responded with aggressive reciprocal tariffs, aiming to maintain its primacy. These measures are designed to protect American industries and assert economic leverage, but they also risk escalating tensions and disrupting global supply chains. BRICS, in turn, has pushed back, opposing what they call indiscriminate tariffs. Their leaders have spoken out against what they see as unfair trade practices, and have taken steps to strengthen their own economic ties, reducing their vulnerability to external pressures. This confrontation has set the stage for a potential economic conflict of unprecedented scale. The ripple effects are already being felt in global markets, with increased volatility, shifting investment patterns, and growing uncertainty about the future of international trade. The question is no longer if the global order will change, but how quickly and at what cost. Will the transition be peaceful and orderly, or marked by instability and confrontation? The answers will shape the lives of billions and determine the course of the 21st century. As BRICS deepens its internal ties, its ability to disrupt the global system grows, and the world watches as the balance of power is tested. The coming years will reveal whether cooperation or competition will define this new era, and what kind of world will emerge from this historic transformation. Imagine a world where BRICS, in a bold and unprecedented move, imposes sweeping retaliatory tariffs on US goods and services. This isn't just a minor policy shift, it's a seismic event in global economics, a coordinated response that would reverberate across continents and industries. These tariffs, ranging from 25% to a staggering 100% on key strategic imports, are a direct and calculated response to escalating US trade threats. The message is clear. BRICS will not stand by as unilateral American policies threaten their economic interests. For the BRICS nations, this isn't an act of aggression but a resolute defense of their economic sovereignty, a collective pushback against what they see as American overreach and dominance in global trade. It's a statement that the era of one-sided decision-making is over. China, with its vast market and manufacturing power, would likely target US agricultural exports, soybeans, corn, and meat, while also clamping down on high-tech components and electronics, disrupting American supply chains and putting pressure on US farmers and tech giants alike. India, a global leader in software and digital services, could impose heavy tariffs or even restrictions on American tech firms, cloud services, and digital platforms, forcing US companies to rethink their strategies in one of the world's fastest-growing digital markets. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Key players in global energy and defense might redirect lucrative defense contracts away from the US, seeking new partners in Europe or Asia, and signaling a shift in the balance of military and economic alliances. The symbolism of this move is profound. Nearly half the world's population, united under the BRICS banner, standing together to challenge decades of US economic dominance. It's a powerful image of solidarity and a call for a more multipolar world order. Such a dramatic escalation would send shockwaves through Washington and Wall Street, rattling investors and policymakers alike. The financial markets would react instantly, with uncertainty and volatility spreading across the globe. The announcement, likely made after a high-stakes BRICS emergency summit, would dominate international headlines, sparking urgent debates in boardrooms, parliaments, and newsrooms worldwide. The world would be forced to reckon with a new reality. Suddenly, the US would find its own hardball tactics turned against it, facing a united front of resistance from countries that have long chafed under American economic pressure. Negotiations would become more complex, and old alliances would be tested. This great reversal would fundamentally alter global supply chains and trade relationships, forcing companies to adapt to new tariffs, reroute shipments, and reconsider their international partnerships. The ripple effects would be felt in every corner of the global economy. The era of unchallenged US economic dominance would be over, replaced by a new, uncertain order where power is more evenly distributed and the rules of global trade are rewritten before our eyes. The impact on the US economy would be immediate and severe. Within days, financial markets would react with shock and uncertainty, sending ripples of fear through Wall Street and Main Street alike. The sense of stability that Americans have long relied on would be shaken to its core, as investors and businesses scramble to make sense of the new reality. American farmers and manufacturers would lose access to their largest markets, leading to plummeting prices, layoffs, and bankruptcies. Entire communities that depend on exports would face sudden hardship, as demand for their products dries up almost overnight. The ripple effect would be felt in small towns and big cities, with families struggling to make ends meet. Consumer goods would become more expensive, as tariffs drive up costs on everything from electronics to clothing. Everyday Americans would feel the pinch at the checkout counter, as imported goods become luxuries and even basic necessities see price hikes. The cost of living would rise, squeezing household budgets and forcing difficult choices. Inflation and unemployment would rise together, creating stagflation and eroding consumer confidence. As jobs disappear and prices soar, the American dream would feel further out of reach for millions. The psychological toll of economic uncertainty would weigh heavily on families and communities. Financial markets would panic. Stocks of multinationals like Apple and Tesla would nosedive. Retirement accounts and savings would shrink, undermining the financial security of millions of Americans. The sense of prosperity that once defined the nation would be replaced by anxiety and doubt. A credit crunch could follow, deepening the downturn as banks pull back on lending. Small businesses would struggle to survive without access to loans, and entrepreneurs would find it nearly impossible to start new ventures. The engine of American innovation would sputter. The US would be forced to rebuild supply chains domestically, an expensive, years-long process. Factories would need to be retooled, workers retrained, and new partnerships forged. The transition would be costly and disruptive with no guarantee of success. Global investment would shift away from the US, threatening its economic dynamism. As capital flees to more stable markets, America's role as the world's financial center would be called into question, and its influence would wane. The country would find itself increasingly isolated as the world reconfigures around the BRICS bloc. New alliances would form, and America's voice on the global stage would grow quieter, making it harder to shape international events. The long-term damage could be a permanent decline in living standards and influence. Generations of progress could be undone, leaving future Americans with fewer opportunities and a diminished place in the world. The shock would ripple far beyond America's borders, reshaping the global economy and altering the course of history for years to come. The fallout wouldn't stop at the US and BRICS. Countries with ties to both blocs, Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America, would be caught in the crossfire, forced to choose sides. Global supply chains would shatter, halting factories worldwide and triggering a manufacturing recession. Financial markets would reel, with investors fleeing to safe havens, but even those could be destabilized by the scale of the crisis. Commodity prices would swing wildly, creating uncertainty and debt crises in vulnerable economies. Institutions like the WTO would be powerless as the world fractures into rival blocs. Decades of globalization would unravel, replaced by division and distrust. The risk of economic disputes spilling into military conflict would rise. For BRICS, this is a risky gamble. China and India would face factory shutdowns and unemployment. Brazil and South Africa would lose key export markets. The bloc would need unprecedented coordination to boost internal trade and survive the loss of U.S. business. The U.S. would try to divide BRICS with preferential deals, testing the alliance's unity. Success depends on solidarity and speed. Can BRICS operationalize alternative financial systems and hold together under pressure? Their goal isn't to destroy the U.S. economy, but to force it to negotiate from a position of weakness. The question, can they endure the pain long enough to reshape the global order? History warns us about trade wars. The Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the 1930s deepened the Great Depression, as protectionism strangled global trade. More recently, U.S.-China trade disputes disrupted supply chains and raised costs, hurting both sides. The 1970s OPEC oil embargo showed how resource control can be weaponized, causing stagflation and forcing policy shifts. But today's scenario is different. For the first time, a coalition nearly as powerful as the U.S. is acting in concert. There's no clear hegemon to stabilize the system, making the risks even greater. The lessons of the past are warnings, but the current crisis is uncharted territory. The stakes are higher than ever. Experts would be deeply divided, but most would agree. A US BRICS trade war would be catastrophic. Some economists would warn of mutual economic suicide, with global GDP plunging. Geopolitical analysts might see it as a painful but necessary shift to a multipolar world. Development experts could sympathize with BRICS, arguing the current system is unfair, but fear the fallout. Business leaders would plead for de-escalation, warning of supply chain chaos and lost markets. In a world this interconnected, there are no true winners in a trade war of this scale. The message: step back from the brink. Diplomacy would go into overdrive. Neutral countries and the UN would rush to broker a standstill, hoping to pause tariffs and open emergency talks. The Security Council would be paralyzed by vetoes, but backroom negotiations would intensify. US allies like the EU and Japan would urge compromise, knowing their own economies are at risk. Any resolution would require US concessions, rolling back tariffs and reforming global institutions. BRICS would demand a real shift in US policy before backing down. The diplomatic endgame, a grand bargain to avert disaster and reform the global system. The world would be racing against time to avoid economic catastrophe. The world stands at a crossroads. One path leads to fragmentation, protectionism, and decline, a repeat of history's darkest chapters. The other path is negotiation and reform, building a more inclusive global order that reflects new realities. This means giving emerging economies a real voice in institutions like the WTO and IMF. For the US, it's a shift from dominance to partnership. For BRICS, a test of responsible leadership. The BRICS tariff wall is a warning. The current trajectory is unsustainable. The coming months will decide whether leaders escalate the crisis or step back and build a new framework for global trade. The choice will shape the world for generations.